So welcome to this webinar. This is working across multidiscipline teams. This is something I've been tussling with for a long time, and you may well feel similar. The challenge of working in an environment that is a little bit alien maybe to the skill set or the sector or the discipline that you work in can often feel a little bit of a challenge. So what we're going to explore as we go through this particular session are the things that you can do to work almost, if you like, in other languages, work in other styles, and really get a sense of what it is actually like working across a team that is multidiscipline. So you may well include a whole variety of different disciplines in your work, working on projects, campaigns, and initiatives in your organization. And often when you work out of preference, which is what it's called, this can set some challenges. So we're going to look at to hopefully address some of those as we go through this particular session. A lovely quote to start us off from Michael Jordan: "Talent wins games, but teamwork and intelligence win championships." I really love that quote. It just kind of says it all, is no matter how good, how effective, how expertise you're able to promote and exhibit in your work, unless you work as part of a broader team, unless you work in a smart fashion, you're not going to get the success that you potentially could. So what we're looking at here is the optimizing, if you like, of your interactions across different groups, different areas of the organization that you work in, and potentially, obviously, integrating other stakeholders from outside of the organization, be that an agency or a supplier, for example. So let's kind of understand really what we're looking at here. When we say multidiscipline team, what do we mean? Well, really, it's a cross-functional team is really what we're talking about here. It's a group of people with different functional expertise working towards a common goal. Now that, as we're going to see as we go through this session, is going to be really important. Different functional expertise working towards a common goal. Common goal, there it is. There is the answer. So if you're only listening to this little section of this particular talk, there's your answer. So we're almost going to reverse engineer back from that, working towards a common goal, because without that, everybody is going to be doing their own thing. Everybody's going to be taking their own perspective. Nothing's going to be aligned. Nothing kind of joins up. And then, of course, if you have a team that includes people from finance, from marketing, operations, HR, etc., it's very, very hard because, as I said earlier, being multidisciplinary, you're going to be talking different languages. You're going to be viewing the world from your own lenses. So having a common goal is the key. Okay, so if you're taking notes in this session, that is going to be the one that I'm hoping is going to be, you're going to see it a number of times as we go through this, but also it is that kind of overarching umbrella to successful multidiscipline team working. Now, interestingly, some of the very best examples of this don't come from within business. So understanding multidiscipline teams, often come from healthcare, for example. So you could, if you were looking at the healthcare example, include a doctor, social worker, physio, and staff from the local authority, housing and voluntary organizations. And when they work really effectively, I mean, there's some really diverse occupations and disciplines there. When they work effectively, these professionals can deliver person-centered and coordinated care and support for the person with the care needs. Okay, lovely example there from Social Care Institute for Excellence. And really what they're talking about here is just this idea that if you keep the ultimate goal or the ultimate person at the center of all of your collective thoughts, focuses, targets, and attention, then really what you're doing is you are aligning just by default. So no matter what part you're playing in the mix, no matter what kind of role you have, no matter how experienced or not you are, being part of a multidiscipline team, you are able to contribute and to coordinate and to collaborate such that you deliver, the optimum return. In obviously the healthcare case, it is the support for the person who is being focused upon. So it's not rocket science. I think this is one of those interesting things that, whilst if you're like me, you might have been tussling with this for many, many years. It isn't rocket science. It's not that complicated, and yet, because of the human nature of a multidiscipline team, we make it complicated. So this is what we're going to focus on in this session. So another example here from healthcare, this is gethealthy.com, and they talk about working with a multidisciplinary team allows you to treat the entire patient and provide comprehensive care. So with each physician focused on a different aspects of the patient's health, providers are more likely to identify areas of need and subsequently manage those needs in an effective way. So we're still within the healthcare environment here. But again, this is where the best practice has been established. It isn't in business. You know, some businesses you could argue are doing this really well, but the real examples of excellence are in healthcare right now. And this is, again, a few little sort of clues in here of things that we can actually learn here in business and in marketing. It allows you, working within a multidisciplinary team, to treat the entire patient and provide comprehensive care. In other words, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, Gestalt theory. In other words, if you add together my contribution and your contribution, and you've got a completely different contribution set, and you're adding that to mine, our collective output is stronger than if we just do it individually ourselves. So the collective is really, really powerful. And of course, what it does, because we're looking at this from a different perspective, if we're in a multidisciplinary team, we can identify things potentially as individuals that others can't. And of course, that gets really interesting because it allows us to see, and I've used this phrase already, you know, looking through a different lens. Well, it allows us to see through a different lens the perspective of the same thing that we might be looking at, but because we're in a multidisciplinary team, we have a different take, we have a different context, if you like, or a different starting point on looking at that very same thing. So we can become super innovative. We can spot those new ideas that from a commercial sense are going to add a lot more value than if we just did it from a marketing perspective. And then we will make sure, again, going back to a little bit of a nod towards the Michael Jordan quote, we'll make sure that we're covering all bases. So what we're looking at here then fundamentally is collaboration. Okay, so the key factors here for successful collaboration is, as we started off by saying, a clearly stated, shared and measurable purpose, that common goal that we were talking about. But it needs to be clear. You've got to clearly state it. You've got to agree it. You've got to share it and share it out. And of course, by making it measurable, you can then track progress. And we'll come back to that in just a minute. Training in interprofessional collaboration is another key thing here, making sure that everybody knows that this is not about egos. This is not about me outdoing you because I just happen to be more senior or more experienced. This is all about interprofessional collaboration. In other words, I'm going to bring value, you're going to bring value, and our collective value is going to be really, really powerful. It's also really important to identify roles. I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about roles in just a moment, because that's important in a multidisciplinary team. But it's also about leadership clarity. Who is the leader? Who's the facilitator here? You know, the different roles that come into team play are really important, as is an appropriate team size and the allocation of those resources, the time, the people, the budget as appropriate. So when it comes to appropriate team size, just because you've got a big team does not mean it's going to be a successful multidisciplinary team. Lots of teams that, you know, I've worked in the past, you think, hold on, there's quite a bit of surplus resource here. Actually, a lot of us sat in that meeting and we didn't contribute. So where was the value we added? We were there because we're part of the team. So often there's a lot of wastage, if you like. So it's about being really sharp and smart with the appropriateness of the team size. And we'll come on to kind of team meetings and things in a minute. But it is about really being thoughtful and mindful of how you compose the team, obviously of appropriate professionals. You know, if you need a certain discipline or specialism, bring that in, invite that into the mix. And it isn't always the most obvious ones. Sometimes you might decide, actually, let's bring that person in, because even though they're not going to be part of the eventual delivery of this thing that we're focusing on, they might have an interesting perspective. Invite them in as a guest for maybe one meeting. So you're actually being quite flexible. You're being adaptable as you bring your team of appropriate professionals together. And then, of course, as part of that, what you need to do is make sure that there is an appropriate mechanism, system, or process to timely exchange information as you go forward. So in other words, sharing meeting notes, collaborating and sharing and reporting back on the progress towards goals, for example. So there's a lot of key factors that will automatically get you off the starting blocks in a really positive way. And to be honest, even if you just did these 6 things, you'd be probably making really, really good inroads versus where you are right now. So there's a lot of opportunity here to kind of make some really fast improvements, because if we're being honest, most organizations do not do this particularly well. So I'm going to start now looking at a slightly deeper dive into some of the things that, again, if you're keeping a checklist of all the things that you need to be thinking about, this is kind of where that checklist really starts. So let's begin with communication techniques. First thing I want you to be thinking about is establishing a common language. In other words, is this project that we're going to be focusing on, is this activity, initiative, whatever you want to call it, is it from a perspective of finance? Because if it is, then the finance becomes the common language. If this is about market development, then you could decide, well, it's kind of a marketing and sales kind of language. So yeah, we'll have finance in the team, but the lead kind of message, if you like, or the lead common language is focused in a particular way that will hopefully support the end goal that you've set. So by not knowing what the end goal is, it's very hard to kind of establish that at the outset. So make sure you decide, okay, who's kind of got the lead here in terms of the spin of the way we're going to talk about and manage this particular project. Now, of course, as soon as you do that, there are going to be outsiders. So if you decide it's a market-focused initiative and you have a finance manager or accountant or a finance director in the team, then what you need to make sure is that you're actively listening and demonstrating empathy, because automatically you're talking a different language to them. Because, of course, they want to be talking in a language that suits and matches their specialism. So this is really, really key. So by really understanding, okay, where are they? Do they understand the language we're talking? If we keep going back into marketing speak, or, we keep talking sort of marketing communications stuff that, pretty much nobody outside of marketing understands, then we are going to miss a trick here. So actively listening and checking back, does this person understand? Get them to kind of repeat and summarize back what you've just briefed in or what you've just suggested. Say, could I just get a reflection back, please? Can somebody sort of explain to me what I've just said, just so I can do a check and balance? And that shows a level of active listening and empathy. It shows that you care. It shows that it means something, that you have got everybody on board and on side. And as part of that, ensuring that you have, well, the best advice always says regular team meetings and updates, but you can decide what we mean by regular. Obviously not too often, because then you get this wastage and this slack in the system that I talked about earlier, but enough so that this project or this campaign or exercise gathers its own momentum. So, part of communication effectively within a multidiscipline team is keeping the level of energy quite high. So it doesn't mean being all rah-rah and sort of all hyped up and completely wired. But what it does mean is that you've got an energy flow. So people know where they can get information. They know that they can get together, be it virtually, hybrid, or in person. They know when they're going to get specific updates. So the communication flow isn't a barrier. Now, often when people don't get copied into minutes of meetings, or they're not really quite sure what the next step is because, the team hasn't met for a month or whatever, this is when things come to a very, very quick halt. And you often see this in things like, parish council meetings and, some of these kinds of organizations where it's a very, very dispersed and very, very multidisciplinary group of people coming together. So it's vital that you understand what the process for regular, timely, smart communication is. So that's meetings, updates, processes, and systems. So that's a really key one to start our little checklist off. Now, this is one that I said right at the start, the whole common goals. So aligning goals and objectives is really, really key here. So setting clear expectations, not only of what this project is, but also what it isn't. Okay, because what you'll get is something called feature creep. And it is the bane of your life if you're a project manager, because people will come in with their own perspective because, oh, look, I've got this opportunity. I know we're focused on this particular part of the project right now, but look, I've got this great idea, this great innovation. Suddenly that's a new spec and something added into the big machine that you're trying to create here. So by setting clear expectations of what the project is, what it isn't, the boundaries into which our innovation and our new ideas can sit, and then establishing some shared KPIs, key performance indicators, so that as you begin to make progress in meetings, in actions and activities and deliverables outside of those meetings, you can actually share the KPIs so you can see the progress that you're making from different perspectives. Okay, so this is beyond just pure project management and managing of a Gantt timeline. This is very much about kind of really understanding that, okay, we need to give a little bit of something to everyone. So finance get their little piece of the pie. There's a KPI here for finance. There's a KPI here for HR. So there's a people-related thing. Something in here for sales because they need to see some performance and growth data. So there's something in it for them. So the key performance indicators are not just purely focused on the leader of the project. So the project is very mindfully inclusive and including everybody. And what that will do is that will stimulate continuous progress tracking and feedback. And what would be nicer? I mean, it's just a really nice thing that if you as a marketer who maybe isn't, if you're a little bit like me, not particularly finance savvy, if you're actually learning as you go, then there's a personal development option here as well. So another great benefit of a multidiscipline team is the way that you can actually learn from others who have a different perspective. They talk a slightly different language, and they're going to give you, maybe some tools, maybe some techniques, or just some formulae to kind of maybe just view what you'd already viewed, but from a slightly different perspective. So it can get really quite interesting if you kind of really start to align these goals and objectives together. And it should be fun. This is the point, this whole continuous evolution and development of the project, as well as the individuals in this from a multidiscipline angle, should be fun. And what we're doing here is we're starting to introduce the idea of individual strengths and then really leveraging those as part of this process. So, recognizing any team members' expertise, so their personal specialism, rewarding them, incentivizing them, encouraging them to kind of give their piece of the pie and really contribute and add value. It's about careful task delegation and ownership. So really allowing people to take accountability, pure project management skills here. The best project managers are the ones who don't actually do any of the work. They allow accountability and ownership of all the various tasks to be delegated out upwards, downwards, sideways, wherever it needs to be to leverage the strengths of the team. At the same time, obviously, that encourages personal development that we just talked about. So when you start putting your team together, how is that going to look? Well, there's a very, very famous creator of project management best practice called Belbin. There's a lot of work that Belbin did on the idea of different team roles and team players. Now, you may well be aware of this, but this really comes into play when we're working across multidiscipline teams, because you do see the extremes of the spectrum that we're all on. So if you have a very well-balanced multidiscipline team, what you're very likely to do is you're likely to see people who are focused on people. Okay, so you'll see the coordinator, you'll see the team worker, you'll see the resource investigator. They're very, very kind of extrovertly looking after everybody's best interests. They're coordinating, they're facilitating, they're collaborating. And that's great. It's a team. So therefore, particularly as if it's a multidiscipline team, it means they're going to be listening, they're going to be working together, collaborating, making stuff happen from a people perspective. And then we're going to have another group, and we do need to balance this within our multidiscipline team. And we mustn't necessarily stereotype. So just because you're thought of as the marketer does not mean necessarily that you are the people-orientated person. You know, we have marketers, and I'll put myself into this category, who are introverted. You know, they're not here to play the team game necessarily, but what they are here is maybe more of a cerebral kind of role. So they could be a specialist, they could be a monitor, evaluator, or they could be a plant. So these people are going to be performing a fundamentally different style of role. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's aligned directly with their specialism. So don't always think, if you're using Belbin, that, oh, because it's a marketer, they're going to be the life and soul of the party, or the extrovert, so they are the people orientated role. That doesn't always follow. So you need to kind of really get to know the people who you are bringing into your team, know their preferences, know their kind of, you know, preferred style, and the best way that they know themselves to work best, to give best value, and really listen. So this is, again, active listening in place here. And then you're also going to need, and you really do need this, action-oriented roles. So these are the shapers, the implementers, and really importantly, the completer finishers. You know, you will get the people who are kind of all about the people, you get the people who are all about the, you know, the process and ideas and innovation and stuff. And then your project doesn't actually deliver anything. So it was fun, it was great, everyone had a good time, we spent loads of money and time and energy, but we didn't actually finish anything. We didn't get to that common goal that we'd set. So you always need a completer finisher, somebody who will take the project over the line. Now, it's interesting when you look at the strengths, a lot of the work that Belbin did, and a lot of the people who have used Belbin in the past have always worked on the strengths of these particular individual groups of team roles, but they also have allowable weaknesses. You know, they are okay to not be perfect in everything. So the chairperson or the coordinator or the project manager, for example, doesn't necessarily have to be you know, somebody who is actually going to physically deliver anything. They need to be able and allowed to have certain weaknesses to maybe infill where there's something they're not particularly good at or strong at, where somebody else actually in the team could fill in and take over that role. And that applies to all of the Belbin profiles. But the trick here, and you can search out various visuals to find Belbin, people roles or team roles, as it's called, and then just review the kind of projects that you've got going on right now. And even if it's a small project, if you surround yourself with people just like you, same preferences, same strengths, same orientations, what are you going to do? You're only going to get a duplicate of you. And is that really working across a multidiscipline team for the benefits that we've already started to see, if you do leverage it correctly, will come through? The answer almost certainly is no. So the Belbin checklist, as I always call it, is a great way to just use on existing projects, see where you are, see if there's any kind of gaps, see if there's any specialisms or strengths that you really do need. And often this gives you an insight into particularly a project that maybe has stalled or not really delivering great value. Often this one might potentially get you over the line. And of course, as part of doing this, we're talking about building trust and accountability, letting people do their specialism, letting people really understand the value that they're bringing, making them accountable. And this in itself, by allowing people to take on a particular role, take on a particular specialism, have specific deliverables associated with the project. This allows, you know, a real kind of trust within the team to start to emerge. So it gets really interesting here. You form really tight bonds and relationships, even if, you know, you are quite an introverted person and, you know, you kind of like working solo, you know, team working is not your thing. You can still find yourself, as I found, you know, over the years, still find yourself quite kind of fueled and actually really enjoying this kind of, you know, collaboration and the open and transparent communication that comes with that. Because of course it allows you to celebrate the achievements, both personally, if somebody in the team does a really, really great job, but also hitting the milestones, you know, those KPIs, those key performance indicators. And if each discipline, if each specialism has their own KPI, then that's again another lovely way of collaborating, you know, the team together, so that they're all again consistently and constantly through the project pointing in the same direction. And of course, this accountability and trust does open up the door to address conflicts and find resolutions in a really positive way. You don't kind of get bogged down in the politics of the team. The egos almost get pushed aside because everyone is working to preference. Everyone is working to specialism, and they're working to the expertise that they're bringing into the mix. So as you can see, if you start to kind of consider smartly and really mindfully all of these building blocks, it allows you to be pretty agile. It allows you to run projects potentially in a more kind of flexible way. And of course, as we're all finding right now, there's a lot of chaos out there. There's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of fluidity, if we use a very positive word there, right now in most marketplaces. And so we need to be agile, we need to be flexible. But this multidiscipline approach, using something like Belbin, working to common goals, speaking a common language, sharing your specialism KPIs, allows you to adapt very, very quickly to any change or uncertainty or any plan B that you need to instigate as you go through the project. So you can actually take a really kind of iterative approach here. And you can actually kind of almost build in something like continuous improvement as, the heart of the project. So what you're doing is at every single step, at every single review, every single meeting, you're constantly looking for how can we do this better? 1%, or as it's called, incremental gains, little incremental improvements at every step. And of course, those can come from anywhere and any discipline. So again, sharing the gains and the optimizing that you're doing as you go through the project. And of course, balancing as you go through this, autonomy and collaboration. Just a little nod back to those Belbin preferences. It doesn't mean that this is all about sitting in a shared space and everybody working collaboratively all the time. The beauty of multidiscipline teamwork, the beauty of working with some of those Belbin preferences is that it is about a balance, giving people autonomy, but also giving them space for when they need and would like to collaborate. That is really key here. This is not all about saying, must be a good team worker to join my team. Sometimes you don't need a good team worker to really contribute to the team. They just need to pop in occasionally, but at other times it's acceptable within the multidiscipline team for them to just work quietly away in the background or in the corner. And if you decide that's okay, and collectively you agree that's a thing for your particular project, then why not? You are setting the rules here, using some of these principles as you go forward. And if we bring this back specifically to a marketing audience, obviously most of you listening to this are in marketing right now. So integrating marketing efforts by, thinking about multidiscipline teamwork for aligning, if you've got a cross-channel strategy, so you're doing digital, you're doing events, you're doing, kind of offline stuff, you've got a whole range of different channels, multidisciplinary team thinking. So again, the Belbin stuff, again, common goals. It's just a really neat way of aligning all of the channels that you're working in if you're in marketing communications. It helps as well, obviously, with consistent messaging and branding. It helps the others in the business or the organization to understand marketing speak, to understand actually what you mean when you talk about engagement, and it's what you mean when you talk about reach. Some of these very marketing centric terms suddenly start to make sense in a multidiscipline team. So again, this sort of thing can be really shared and enjoyed, by so many people if they're kind of focused as well and given the permission and the time to think of this as a personal development exercise as much as a just project delivery. And of course, if you're looking at continuous improvement, one of the really key things here is this whole idea of shared reporting and analytics. And I always come back, you might have your own preferred option here, but I always come back to balanced scorecard. So for me, the key number one dashboard as a concept, and you can create these things to work for you, and you can personalize and adapt them, but just the concept of balanced scorecard within multidiscipline teamwork allows everybody to see their part of the pie and how it's contributing to the end goal. So balanced scorecard for me is the number one. And again, it can be a lovely talking point actually when you get into meetings. And what you'll be doing then is you'll actually be setting everybody up to not only measure, but also celebrate the success of the project, because you'll be identifying key success metrics. So you'll know if you're kind of doing regular performance evaluations and kind of really understanding not just that, okay, we hit that performance target, but how and why. What happened? Could we have exceeded it? What would have happened if we'd done this? Would that have come in under? And so constantly evaluating what you do, because ultimately, one, you need to hit the goals of the project and really celebrate, as a multidiscipline team, but also you want to be leaving a legacy. And this is something that is really important, particularly if marketing is leading the project, because this allows us to possibly punch above our weight currently at the management table or, on the board. Because if we can be seen to be working collaboratively across multidisciplinary teams, it's all evidence-based, everybody's having a great time, we're using the resources effectively, so it's super efficient, it's really optimized, what would not be liked by the business? That would be celebrated. And in effect, what you're doing, the legacy of your project work is creating something that's going to be really, really helpful for the future of the business. Now, when I was setting this little talk up, I thought, well, I need to leave you with a few examples of good practice. As I say, it's not rocket science, but it's just about being really mindful and considered, using some of these techniques and some of this thinking and building on the checklist to really personalize it for yourself. And you would not be alone. There are many, many examples of multidiscipline collaborations across a lot of very, very big brands. And if you go to ventureradar.com and search on multidisciplinary, they have a whole host of examples that you can do a bit of a deep dive read into and see some of the really good stuff that not only in manufacturing, but in a whole host of different styles of industry and styles of sector are being very successfully implemented around the globe. So this is not a thing that's just in your country. This is not a thing that's just in your sector. This is small, medium, and large organizations who, if they do embrace this stuff, really can kick on in terms of an organization. And as we all start to move towards being, purpose and value-driven organizations, this kind of multidiscipline team working is really at the heart of successful business going forward. So this is not an old topic. This is a topic that is only going to get bigger and more important to all of us as we go forward. And I want to just leave you at the end of this little talk with a quote from Franklin D. Roosevelt. Franklin said, "I'm not the smartest fellow in the world, but I sure can pick smart colleagues." And that's a kind of key thing about multidiscipline team working, is it's always being on the lookout for people who are smart, probably smarter than you. They've got more specialisms than you. And it's about not being defensive. It's about celebrating that I'm bringing a specialist in for this, and I'm going to surround myself with experts. Often we've heard that phrase, particularly in sport and obviously in business as well, surrounding yourself with experts. It's a really key way for developing organizations, for developing teams, and for hitting your goals. So don't be embarrassed if you don't know anything about the project that you're about to lead or the responsibility you've just been given. Surround yourself with smart colleagues. And if it can work for Roosevelt, I'm sure it can work for all of us.